In the autumn of 1847, within the shadow-draped valleys of western Pennsylvania, 4 infant girls were delivered into this world under circumstances so peculiar that the attending physician would carry their secret to his grave. Born during a thunderstorm of unprecedented violence in the hidden cellar of a Methodist church that served as sanctuary for those fleeing bondage, these children possessed capabilities that challenged the very foundations of human understanding. For more than 150 years, their bloodline has safeguarded mysteries that, once exposed, would compel us to question everything we believed about the boundaries of human consciousness. What I'm about to reveal has remained concealed within family archives, never recorded in medical literature, and never discussed in scholarly circles. The truth has been deliberately obscured, but tonight, through the Holloway Archives, this extraordinary account emerges from the darkness. Before we delve into this haunting narrative that began in America's most clandestine network of freedom, I must understand who among you possesses the courage to confront revelations that shatter conventional beliefs about human potential. This channel exists for those bold enough to explore mysteries that challenge the very essence of what we consider possible. If you count yourself among the rare few who can embrace stories that dissolve the barriers between documented history and incomprehensible phenomena, engage with this content immediately. Share in the comments which region you're watching from tonight. I need to know where my fellow seekers of truth have gathered. Because what you're about to discover occurred not in some remote mystical realm, but here in America, in communities that might be disturbingly near your own location. The chronicle I'm about to unfold began on a tempestuous October evening when 4 souls entered existence in the most improbable sanctuary imaginable, setting in motion events that would confound medical professionals and researchers for generations to follow. The settlement of Meridian Crossing, Pennsylvania, barely warranted recognition in 1847. Housing fewer than 400 residents, it comprised little more than a collection of humble dwellings, a trading post, a forge, and the modest stone church that served the local Methodist congregation. Unlike their more theatrical Protestant neighbors, the Methodists of Meridian Crossing practiced their faith with quiet determination, their simple clothing and reserved manner reflecting deep commitment to equality and, most significantly, to the revolutionary belief that all humans possessed equal worth before their Creator. This conviction had transformed their sanctuary into something far more perilous than a house of worship. It had become Station 7 on the Underground Railroad, a vital waypoint for those seeking freedom as they traveled north from Virginia and Maryland. Pastor Jonathan Blackwell, a man whose weathered features spoke of decades tending both crops and souls, and whose penetrating blue eyes harbored secrets that could condemn half his congregation, had been orchestrating these covert operations for nearly a decade. Beneath the church's stone foundation lay an ingeniously concealed chamber, accessed through a hidden panel behind the pulpit. The chamber represented a masterpiece of desperate ingenuity. Excavated by hand during countless moonless nights, it extended nearly the entire width of the building overhead. Sturdy oak beams supported the ceiling, while air circulation came through an elaborate network of concealed pipes disguised as decorative elements that channeled fresh oxygen to those sheltering below. During any given fortnight, between 5 and 20 freedom seekers might take refuge there, some for mere hours, others for weeks, awaiting safe transport to the next station. October of 1847 had proven exceptionally hazardous. The Compromise of 1850 was still years away, but aggressive slave hunters like the infamous Caldwell Gang had been prowling the area for months, offering substantial bounties for intelligence about Underground Railroad activities. The atmosphere in Meridian Crossing was suffocating with tension. Every unexpected visitor, every nighttime sound, every unusual occurrence could herald discovery and imprisonment. Against this backdrop of fear and secrecy, a young woman had appeared at the church 4 days previously. She had offered only the name Sarah, claimed to be 21 years old, and was unmistakably expecting a child, very much expecting a child. Pastor Blackwell had taken one glance at her condition and understood immediately that she would be traveling no further north for considerable time. What he hadn't anticipated was how rapidly that child would arrive, or how profoundly its arrival would alter everything they understood about human nature. Sarah had journeyed from a plantation in Northern Virginia, she revealed during whispered conversations in the underground chamber. She spoke with the refined pronunciation of someone educated in letters, extraordinary for her circumstances, and carried herself with quiet dignity that impressed even the austere Methodists. But there existed something else about her, something that created unease without clear explanation. She appeared to perceive things, subtle things, but disturbing in their position. She would sense when someone approached the church long before footsteps could be detected. Most unsettling, she would sometimes gaze directly at whoever was speaking and gently contradict their statements, not argumentatively, but with the serene certainty of someone who simply possessed superior knowledge. That merchant who delivered provisions yesterday, she had mentioned to Pastor Blackwell's wife, Ruth, during her 3rd evening there. He claimed his name was Morrison and that he traveled from Lancaster, didn't he? Ruth had confirmed this, perplexed. His name isn't Morrison, Sarah had continued, her voice barely audible. And he's never set foot in Lancaster. I cannot explain why he deceived you, but he did. Ruth had dismissed this as the paranoid imaginings of a frightened, expectant woman, until 3 days later, when the man's true identity was revealed. He was indeed using false credentials and had been asking suspicious questions about the church's Underground Railroad activities. The evening of October 27, 1847, commenced like many others in Meridian Crossing, cold, dark, and deceptively peaceful. Pastor Blackwell had been conducting his evening devotions when urgent knocking came at the church door, followed by the predetermined signal. 4 rapid taps, silence, then 3 more. But something felt wrong from the instant Pastor Blackwell raised the heavy wooden bar securing the entrance. The freedom seeker who stumbled inside was a man named Elijah, someone Pastor Blackwell had assisted previously. But Elijah's customary composure had been replaced by barely controlled terror. "They approach," Elijah gasped, his breath creating white clouds in the frigid air. "The Caldwell gang and at least 8 others. They possess hounds and they know about this location. Someone betrayed us." He paused, his eyes. The church had always been considered secure, protected by the community's reputation for honesty and their meticulous operational procedures. But if the Caldwells approached with dogs and advanced intelligence about the chamber, someone had indeed revealed them. The immediate challenge was evacuation. Currently, 9 people sheltered in the underground chamber, including Sarah, who had been experiencing irregular labor pains throughout the day. Ruth Blackwell had been monitoring her condition, but had hoped the birth would delay for at least another week. Nature, however, appeared to have different intentions. As if summoned by Elijah's words, a low groan echoed from beneath the floorboards. Ruth's face drained of color. "Jonathan," she whispered, "Sarah's time has arrived." Immediately, the following hours unfolded like a nightmare carved from ice and dread, while Pastor Blackwell and 3 other men labored frantically to evacuate the remaining 8 freedom seekers through the church's concealed northern passage. a hand-dug tunnel that emerged nearly half a mile away in a dense thicket of pine trees. Ruth and her daughter Mary descended into the chamber to attend Sarah's labor. What they discovered in that cramped, dimly illuminated space defied every assumption they held about childbirth. Sarah was indeed in active labor, but something was fundamentally wrong. She exhibited none of the typical signs of distress or pain accompanying difficult deliveries. Instead, she lay perfectly motionless on the rough straw mattress, her eyes closed, her breathing measured and controlled. When contractions arrived, she didn't cry out or even tense her muscles. She simply waited, as if listening to something only she could perceive. "How many children?" Ruth inquired, pressing her ear to Sarah's swollen abdomen in the traditional manner of
4, she said simply. 4 daughters. They've been waiting for tonight. Ruth exchanged an alarmed glance with her daughter. Quadruplets were sufficiently rare under optimal circumstances, but quadruplets born in a hidden chamber while slave hunters approached with bloodhounds represented a situation beyond anything in her experience. More troubling was Sarah's certainty about the children's gender and her strange comment about them waiting. How could unborn children wait for anything? The sound of horses in the distance interrupted Ruth's confusion. Pastor Blackwell's voice called down from above. "They're here. The tunnel's clear, but we cannot risk moving Sarah now." What occurred next was documented in Ruth Blackwell's private journal, a manuscript that remained hidden in her family for over a century before being discovered in 1998 during the restoration of an old farmhouse. According to her account, written mere days after the events, Sarah's labor accelerated dramatically the moment the slave hunters arrived at the church. But it accelerated in a manner that defied medical comprehension. The first baby was delivered in absolute silence. No crying, no sound whatsoever, except for Sarah's barely audible breathing. Ruth caught the infant, a perfectly formed girl, and was startled to find her already breathing normally, her eyes open and aware. Before she could even sever the umbilical cord, the second baby arrived, again in total silence, again breathing and conscious from the moment of birth. The third followed within minutes, completing what Ruth described as the most unnatural natural birth I have ever witnessed. But the strangest aspect was yet to come. As Ruth's heavy boots walked across the stone floors, just feet above the newborns' heads. At one point, someone stood directly on the panel that concealed the chamber entrance. Throughout this entire ordeal, with dangerous men and tracking dogs immediately above them, the 4 babies never produced a sound. Not a cry, not a whimper, not even the small noises that all newborns make. They lay perfectly still in their mother's arms, their identical dark eyes moving back and forth as if tracking the movement of the searchers overhead. It was as if they somehow comprehended that their survival depended on absolute silence. Sarah never spoke during the search. According to Ruth's journal, she simply held her 4 daughters and whispered to them in a language that resembled no dialect Ruth had ever encountered. Later, Ruth would describe it as words that seemed to flow like water, soft and continuous, like a stream running over stones. The search lasted nearly 4 hours. The Caldwells were thorough, methodical, and increasingly frustrated. They examined every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. Their dogs sniffed around the church's foundation and even scratched at the floorboards in several locations, but they never discovered the entrance to the chamber. Eventually, they departed, cursing their informant for providing false intelligence. Only after the sounds of horses had completely faded into the distance did the 4 babies finally make their first sounds. And when they did,
All four cried in perfect harmony, their voices blending into a single haunting wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the chamber. Her final words, spoken so quietly that Ruth had to lean close to hear them, were, "They'll perceive things. They'll always perceive. Care for them, but remember, they're not like other children." The death of Sarah left the Methodist community of Meridian Crossing confronting an impossible situation. 4 newborn girls with no known father, no family, and no legal existence. Slave children born free on Pennsylvania soil, but with no documentation to prove their status. Pastor Blackwell made the decision that would define the remainder of his life. The community would raise the girls collectively, each family taking turns caring for them, but all sharing responsibility for their upbringing. The girls were named by the community in Methodist tradition: faith, hope, grace, and charity. From their earliest days, it became clear that Sarah's final words had been more than the ravings of a dying woman. The 4 girls were indeed not like other children, but in ways that were subtle enough to be dismissed as coincidence by anyone not observing closely. Ruth Blackwell, who had assumed primary responsibility for the girls' care during their first year, began maintaining detailed notes about their behavior. These notes, discovered alongside her birth journal, provide a disturbing glimpse into the early manifestations of the girls' unusual abilities. At 8 months old, the quadruplets had developed a habit that unnerved their caregivers. They would all turn their heads in the same direction at precisely the same moment, often focusing on empty doorways or windows where no one was visible. When someone eventually appeared in those locations, sometimes minutes later, it was always a person who was troubled, angry, or concealing something. The girls seemed to sense emotional disturbance long before any adult. By their first birthday, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. The quadruplets could identify deception with unerring accuracy. When community members spoke to them, the girls would respond normally to truthful statements, but would turn away and refuse to engage with anyone who was being dishonest, even about trivial matters. Initially, the adults found this amusing, even helpful. If someone claimed to have completed a task they'd actually forgotten, the girls would immediately know. If a visitor to the church provided a false name or misleading information about their background, the quadruplets would become agitated and refuse to approach that person. But the ability was more than simple lie detection. As the girls matured, they seemed to sense deception in all its forms, not just spoken lies, but hidden intentions, concealed emotions, and unspoken plans. Pastor Blackwell wrote in his private correspondence, "It is as if the girls can see directly into the human soul and know what lies therein. This would be a blessing, perhaps, if it did not seem to cause them such distress. They are constantly aware of the small falsehoods and hidden thoughts that all people carry, and this knowledge appears to be a burden rather than a gift." More disturbing were the girls' reactions to specific types of deception. They showed particular distress around anyone who was concealing information about missing persons or hidden violence. During their second year, a traveling preacher named Davis stopped at the church, claiming to be journeying to Pittsburgh on missionary work. The quadruplets became so agitated in his presence that they couldn't sleep or eat until he left. 3 weeks later, news arrived that Davis had been arrested for the murder of his traveling companion, whose body had been concealed in Davis's wagon during his visit to Meridian Crossing. By age 3, the girls had developed what the community began calling the knowing look, a shared expression they would adopt when focusing on someone who was hiding something significant. All 4 would turn their heads simultaneously, their dark eyes seeming to penetrate whomever had attracted their attention. Most unsettling was their habit of whispering to each other during these episodes, always in that strange flowing language that Sarah had used during their birth. Dr. Marcus Thompson, the local physician who had been monitoring the girls' development, was both fascinated and disturbed by their abilities. In a letter to a colleague at Jefferson Medical College, he wrote, "I have examined these children repeatedly and can find no physical abnormality that would account for their unusual perceptive abilities. Their hearing, vision, and other senses appear normal, though perhaps slightly more acute than average. Yet they consistently demonstrate knowledge of matters that should be beyond their perception. I am forced to conclude that either these children possess some form of sensory capacity unknown to medical science, or I am the victim of an elaborate deception. Though how 4 3-year-old children could maintain such a deception is beyond my understanding." The girls' impact on Underground Railroad operations was immediate and profound. Word of their abilities spread quietly through the network of stations and conductors. Freedom seekers began requesting specifically to be routed through Meridian Crossing, knowing that the girls could identify infiltrators. If they remained calm and peaceful, the freedom seekers knew they were among friends. If the girls became agitated or refused to enter the chamber, it was a certain sign that someone in the group couldn't be trusted. Pastor Blackwell found himself in the uncomfortable position of relying on 4 young children for the security of one of Pennsylvania's most important Underground Railroad stations. But the girls' accuracy was undeniable. Over the course of 4 years, they identified 9 potential infiltrators, preventing what could have been catastrophic discoveries of the network's operations. But their abilities came with a price that became more apparent as they grew older. The girls were increasingly isolated from other children, who found their intense stares and whispered conferences unsettling. Adults in the community, while grateful for the protection the girls provided, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being constantly evaluated and judged. Even the most honest people felt uncomfortable under the quadruplets' watchful eyes, knowing that every thought and emotion was somehow visible to them. Most troubling was the girls' growing awareness of their own abilities and the effect they had on others. By age 5, they had learned to modify their behavior around strangers, keeping their knowing looks subtle and their whispered consultations private. But this self-consciousness seemed to deepen their isolation, creating a barrier between them and the rest of the world that grew more pronounced with each passing year. The year 1852 brought changes to Meridian Crossing that would test the quadruplets' abilities in ways no one could have anticipated. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act had inflamed tensions throughout Pennsylvania, and Underground Railroad activities were becoming increasingly dangerous. Federal marshals were conducting more frequent. It was during this period of heightened danger that the girls, now 5 years old, began demonstrating a new and more disturbing aspect of their abilities. They could not only detect deception and hidden emotions in people who were present, they seemed to sense the emotional distress of people who were miles away. The first documented instance occurred on a bitter December morning when the quadruplets suddenly became extremely agitated despite being safely inside the warm church with their usual caregivers. All 4 girls began crying simultaneously, not the normal crying of upset children, but a keening wail that seemed to express profound terror and desperation. Ruth Blackwell tried everything she could think of to calm them, but nothing worked. The girls continued their distressed crying for nearly 7 hours, finally falling silent just as the sun began to set. 3 days later, a freedom seeker arrived at the church with devastating news. A group of 13 people, including 4 children, had been captured by slave catchers approximately 50 miles south of Meridian Crossing. The capture had occurred at almost exactly the same time the quadruplets had begun their crying. Worse, the captured group included a pregnant woman who had given birth during the attack. Both mother and child had died from exposure during the brutal journey back to Virginia. Pastor Blackwell was shaken by this incident, but dismissed it as coincidence until it happened again 4 weeks later. This time, the girls' distress lasted only 3 hours, but was even more intense. When word arrived the following day, they learned that a conductor on the Underground Railroad had been shot and killed while helping a family escape near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Again, the timing corresponded exactly with the quadruplets' period of extreme distress.
Thompson, who had been documenting the girls' development, was called to examine them after the fourth such incident. His findings, recorded in his private notes, were deeply unsettling. During episodes of apparent long-distance distress sensing, the girls' pulse rates become synchronized, their breathing patterns identical, and their body temperatures drop by several degrees. Most remarkably, their brain activity appears to increase dramatically. They are clearly experiencing intense mental stimulation. Despite appearing outwardly distressed, I can only conclude that their nervous systems are somehow detecting emotional trauma occurring at great distances, though the mechanism by which this occurs is completely unknown to medical science. The girls' long-distance sensing abilities seem to be specifically attuned to situations involving deception, betrayal, and mortal danger. They never reacted to ordinary accidents or natural deaths, but they invariably detected when someone was being hunted, betrayed, or murdered. Their range appeared to extend throughout most of central and southern Pennsylvania and possibly into northern Virginia. Word of the quadruplets' abilities spread beyond the Underground Railroad network. Families with missing loved ones began making pilgrimages to Meridian Crossing, hoping that the girls could somehow sense whether their missing family members were still alive and where they might be found. Pastor Blackwell was reluctant to exploit the children's abilities in this way, but the girls themselves seemed drawn to these desperate families. The most remarkable case involved the Mitchell family, whose 14-year-old son, Robert, had disappeared while traveling to visit relatives in Philadelphia. The boy had been missing for 4 months when his parents arrived in Meridian Crossing. Having heard rumors,
without being asked, the quadruplets lined up in front of Mrs. Mitchell and began their characteristic synchronized whispering. After several minutes, Faith stepped forward and pointed northeast toward the Delaware River. "He's there," she said simply. "He's frightened, but he's alive. The man who took him isn't who he claimed to be." Acting on this information, local authorities searched a remote cabin near the Delaware and found Robert Mitchell locked in a root cellar along with 3 other young boys who had been kidnapped by a man posing as a traveling merchant. The kidnapper was arrested and later confessed to planning to sell the boys into indentured servitude in the Caribbean. The rescue of Robert Mitchell marked a turning point in how the community viewed the quadruplets. No longer were they simply children with an unusual ability to detect lies, they were becoming something else entirely, something that made even their Methodist guardians profoundly uncomfortable. The girls' abilities were growing stronger and more specific with each passing month, and there seemed to be no limit to their range or accuracy. But perhaps most disturbing was the girls' increasing emotional detachment from the world around them. The constant awareness of deception, violence, and human suffering was taking its toll. They rarely smiled, seldom played, and spent most of their time huddled together, whispering in their private language. When they did interact with adults, their conversations were marked with wisdom and sadness that seemed impossible in children so young. Dr. Thompson, in his final notes about the girls before his death in 1854, wrote, "I fear that we are witnessing the emergence of human beings who are fundamentally different from the rest of our species. Their abilities appear to be expanding rather than stabilizing, and I cannot predict what they might become capable of as they mature. More troubling is the psychological cost of their gifts. These children are bearing witness to more human suffering and evil than most adults encounter in a lifetime, and they are doing so without the emotional defenses that adults develop over time. I do not know what kind of women they will become, but I fear they will be women apart from all others, forever isolated by their terrible knowledge of what lies hidden in the human heart. The outbreak of increasing sectional tensions in the mid-1850s brought unprecedented chaos to Pennsylvania's Underground Railroad operations, but it also created new opportunities for the Quadruplets to demonstrate the true extent of their extraordinary abilities. As pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces began moving through the border regions, the girls started exhibiting reactions to political activities that defied all logical explanation. Pastor Blackwell first noticed this new development during the summer of 1855, when 7-year-old Faith, Hope, Grace, and Charity began showing signs of extreme agitation for several days running. The girls would stand at the church windows looking south toward the Maryland border, their faces marked by expressions of horror that seemed far too mature for their years. When Pastor Blackwell asked what was troubling them, Faith, always the most vocal of the four, simply said, "Too many people are going to die. So many people." 4 days later, news arrived of violent confrontations in Kansas Territory, where pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers had clashed in what would later be called Bleeding Kansas. The timing was impossible to dismiss as coincidence, especially when similar incidents began occurring with increasing frequency. The girls seemed to sense major political upheavals days or even weeks before news of them reached Meridian Crossing, and their emotional reactions corresponded precisely to the scale of violence involved. More disturbing was their apparent ability to detect specific individuals among the thousands of people moving through the region. In August of 1855, a young anti-slavery activist named William Hartley stopped at the church while traveling south to distribute literature in Maryland. The Quadruplets took one look at him and immediately began their synchronized whispering, their faces showing expressions of profound sadness. Ruth Blackwell, now in her 70s but still serving as the girls' primary caregiver, asked them what they sensed about the activist. Grace stepped forward and spoke in a voice that seemed too old for her small body. "He won't complete his mission. The man who's supposed to be his guide will betray him for money 4 days from now near the border crossing." William Hartley laughed when told of the prediction, claiming that he was traveling with a trusted companion from his own anti-slavery society. But 4 days later, his body was found near a border crossing 30 miles south of Meridian Crossing. He had been shot and robbed by his traveling companion, a man named Reynolds, who had claimed to be a fellow abolitionist but had actually been working for pro-slavery forces. The accuracy of this prediction sent shock waves through the local community, but it was only the beginning. Over the following months, the girls began making increasingly specific and disturbing predictions about people they encountered. They could tell when someone would die, often down to the day and hour. They could predict betrayals, defections, and acts of violence with unerring accuracy. Most chilling of all, they seemed to know which of the freedom seekers passing through the church would successfully reach Canada and which would be captured or killed along the way. Pastor Blackwell struggled with the moral implications of the girls' knowledge. Should he warn people of the dangers the Quadruplets foresaw? Should he try to prevent the tragedies they predicted? Or was this knowledge too dangerous to act upon? The weight of these decisions was crushing, made worse by the girls' apparent indifference to the suffering they witnessed. They reported deaths and betrayals with the same calm detachment they might use to comment on the weather. The turning point came in the spring of 1856, when a group of 15 freedom seekers arrived at the church, led by a conductor named Marcus Wheeler, whom Pastor Blackwell had worked with for years. Wheeler was a trusted ally, a man who had successfully guided hundreds of people to freedom over the course of 12 years. But when the quadruplets saw him, their reaction was immediate and violent. All 4 girls began screaming the moment Wheeler entered the church, a sound unlike anything they had ever made before. It wasn't the crying of distressed children, but something primal and terrifying, like the warning calls of animals sensing mortal danger. They screamed and pointed at Wheeler, their faces contorted with an expression of pure horror. Wheeler was baffled and offended by the reaction. He had never encountered anything like it from the girls, who had always been calm in his presence during previous visits. Pastor Blackwell tried to question the quadruplets about what they sensed, but they could only repeat over and over, "Death, he brings death, so much death." Despite the girls' warnings, Pastor Blackwell was reluctant to turn away a trusted conductor and 15 desperate freedom seekers. Wheeler insisted that he had brought the group safely from Virginia and was prepared to guide them to the next station. The 15 freedom seekers, men, women, and children ranging in age from 6 to 70, seemed genuinely desperate and showed no signs of deception. But the quadruplets' agitation only intensified as the hours passed. They refused to enter the chamber while Wheeler and his group were there, and they continued their disturbing predictions. Tomorrow night, in the woods by Patterson's Creek, he'll signal to them, and they'll trust him because they think he's their friend, but the men with guns will be waiting. Pastor Blackwell faced an impossible choice. Either trust the word of 4 young children whose abilities he didn't understand, or risk the lives of 15 people based on what might be nothing more than childhood intuition. In the end, he chose a compromise that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He allowed Wheeler and the group to continue their journey, but sent word ahead to the next station, warning them to be cautious. He also arranged for 3 local men to follow at a distance, ostensibly to provide additional security. What they witnessed the following night would validate the quadruplets' warnings in the most horrific way possible. Wheeler led the group to a clearing near Patterson's Creek, just as the girls had predicted. There, instead of guiding them toward the next safe station, he signaled in the darkness. Within minutes, armed slave catchers emerged from the woods. The freedom seekers realized they had been betrayed, but it was too late to escape. In the chaos that followed, 9 people were killed outright, including 3 children. The remaining 6 were captured and dragged back to Virginia in chains. The 3 men Pastor Blackwell had sent to provide security witnessed the entire massacre from a distance, too far away to intervene, but close enough to see Wheeler collect a substantial payment from the leader of the slave catchers. Marcus Wheeler, the trusted conductor who had guided hundreds to freedom, had been working as a double agent for months, selling information about Underground Railroad operations and leading groups into carefully planned ambushes. When news of the massacre reached Meridian Crossing, the entire community was devastated. 9 people were dead, 6 more were condemned to slavery, and one of their most trusted allies had been revealed as a traitor. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that 4 8-year-old children had known exactly what would happen, and their warnings had been ignored. The quadruplets' reaction to the news was unlike anything Pastor Blackwell had ever seen from them. Instead of their usual calm detachment, they showed genuine emotion for the first time in years. Not sadness or anger, but a deep, profound disappointment that seemed to encompass not just the immediate tragedy, but something much larger about the nature of human evil. "People never listen," Hope said quietly, speaking for all 4. "They never want to believe what we can see. They think we're just children, but we've seen more death than anyone in this room. We know what people are capable of when they think no one is watching." The girl's words hung in the air like a pronouncement of judgment, and Pastor Blackwell realized that something fundamental had changed. The quadruplets were no longer just children with unusual abilities. They had become something else entirely, something that could see into the darkest corners of human nature with perfect clarity. And that terrible knowledge was transforming them into beings that were increasingly alien to the rest of humanity. Just when Pastor Blackwell thought he'd seen the full extent of what the girls were capable of, events would soon prove that their abilities were still evolving, still growing stronger. The question was no longer what they could perceive, but what they might become, and whether the community that had raised them would be able to survive the truth of what they really were. The revelation that would forever change how the world understood the quadruplets came during the harsh winter of 1857, when the girls were 10 years old and sectional tensions had reached their breaking point. Dr. Margaret Foster, one of the first female physicians in Pennsylvania and a specialist in neurological conditions, had been studying the girls for 8 months under the auspices of Jefferson Medical College. Dr. Foster's interest had been sparked by reports from Dr. Thompson before his death, and she had convinced Pastor Blackwell to allow a comprehensive medical examination of the quadruplets. What she discovered in that examination would challenge every assumption about human consciousness and perception. Using the most advanced medical instruments available in 1857, Dr. Foster conducted tests that revealed the true nature of the girls' abilities. Her findings, documented in a detailed report that was immediately classified by government authorities and hidden from public view for over 70 years, show that the quadruplets possessed neurological structures that had never been observed in human beings. The girls' brains showed abnormally high activity in regions associated with pattern recognition and emotional processing. But more remarkably, their nervous systems appeared to be in constant communication with each other. When Dr. Foster applied mild electrical stimulation to one girl's arm, the other 3 showed immediate physiological responses despite being in separate rooms. Their heart rates, breathing patterns, and brain waves synchronized during periods of intense concentration, creating what she described as a single consciousness distributed across 4 separate bodies. But the most startling discovery came when Dr. Foster began testing the girls' ability to detect deception using carefully controlled experiments. Foster's discoveries raised even more disturbing questions. If the girls' abilities were the result of genetic mutation, what had caused such a dramatic evolutionary leap? The answer came from analyzing tissue samples from their deceased mother, Sarah, whose body had been preserved in the church cemetery according to Methodist tradition. Medical examination of Sarah's remains revealed that she had been exposed to massive doses of several industrial chemicals during her pregnancy, chemicals that were commonly used in the processing of indigo dye on southern plantations. These chemicals, which included mercury compounds and lead-based pigments, had caused severe neurological damage in Sarah, but had apparently triggered unprecedented genetic changes in her unborn children. The girls represented something entirely new in human evolution, a mutation that might normally have been lethal, but had instead created enhanced sensory capabilities. They were living proof that human consciousness and perception could evolve in ways that science had never imagined possible. Dr. Foster's final revelation was perhaps the most chilling. Based on her analysis of the girls' genetic structure, she concluded that their enhanced abilities were not limited to their generation. The genetic changes that had created their electromagnetic sensitivity were dominant traits that would be passed on to their children and their children's children. "We are witnessing the birth of a new branch of human evolution," she wrote in her most confidential notes. "These girls will bear children with similar abilities, and those children will be even more sensitive to human electromagnetic fields. Within 3 or 4 generations, their descendants may possess sensory capabilities that will make current human perception seem primitive by comparison." The implications were staggering. If their abilities continued to strengthen with each generation, their descendants might eventually be able to read human thoughts as easily as observing facial expressions. But the most immediate concern was what to do with this knowledge.
Sectional tensions were escalating towards civil war, and both Union and Confederate forces would be desperate to exploit the girls' abilities for military intelligence. If word of their capabilities spread beyond the small Methodist community, the quadruplets would become valuable assets to be captured, studied, and used as weapons. Pastor Blackwell faced an impossible decision. Dr. Foster was prepared to publish her findings, which would bring international attention to the girls, but would also ensure their safety through public scrutiny. Alternatively, the research could be suppressed, protecting the girls' privacy, but leaving them vulnerable to those who already knew of their abilities. The decision was made for them on a cold November morning when federal agents arrived in Meridian Crossing with orders to bring the quadruplets to Washington for consultation on matters of national security. Someone in the government hierarchy had learned of Dr. Foster's research and decided that the girls' abilities could be valuable for interrogating suspected Confederate sympathizers and detecting Confederate spies. But the quadruplets had sensed the agents' approach long before they reached the church. When Pastor Blackwell found the girls that morning, they were already packed and ready to leave, their few possessions bundled in small cloth sacks. "We have to go," Faith said simply. "If we stay, terrible things will happen to everyone here. We've seen it." Hope nodded gravely. "The men who are coming don't just want to use us. They want to study us, cut us open, see how we work. And when they're done with us, they'll come for our children and our children's children." Grace, always the quietest of the four, spoke last. "We've seen the future they want to create. A world where people like us are kept in laboratories and used as tools. We won't let that happen." The girls' decision was final. They would disappear before the federal agents arrived, vanishing into the network of caves and hidden passages that riddled the hills around Meridian Crossing. Pastor Blackwell made one last desperate attempt to convince them to stay, arguing that they would be safer under government protection than hiding in the wilderness. Faith's response revealed just how much the girls had matured beyond their 10 years. "Pastor Blackwell, we can sense the intentions of every person within 60 miles of this place. We know that the government men aren't coming to protect us. They're coming to own us. We've felt their thoughts, and we know what they plan to do. We'd rather take our chances in the wild than become prisoners in a laboratory." As the sounds of approaching horses echoed across the frozen fields, the quadruplets prepared to leave the only home they had ever known. But before they departed, they made one final revelation that would haunt Pastor Blackwell for the rest of his life. "There are others," Hope said quietly. "Not many, but some. Other children born during times of great violence and suffering. Children whose mothers were exposed to the same kinds of poisons that changed us. They're scattered across the country, and most will teach them what we've learned to help them understand their abilities. And maybe, if we're careful, we can build something better than what exists now. A world where people can't lie to each other, can't hide their evil intentions, can't pretend to be something they're not." The girls' final words as they prepared to vanish into the wilderness were both a promise and a warning. "We'll be watching. We'll always be watching. And we'll remember who helped us and who tried to hurt us. That knowledge will be passed down to our children and their children and their children after that. The world is about to change in ways that people can't imagine, and it's going to start with us." The federal agents arrived at the church 4 hours after the quadruplets had disappeared, finding only empty rooms and the fading traces of 4 extraordinary children who had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. Despite extensive searches involving tracking dogs and military units, no trace of the girls was ever found. They had simply melted away into the Pennsylvania countryside, leaving behind only memories and questions that would never be fully answered. Dr. Margaret Foster's research was immediately classified by military authorities and remained sealed for over 70 years.
When her papers were finally released in 1928, they caused a sensation in the medical community. But by then, the girls would have been over 80 years old, and any hope of studying them had long since passed. Pastor Blackwell lived until 1891, carrying the secret of what he had witnessed for the rest of his life. In his private papers discovered after his death, he wrote, "I have seen the future of humanity, and those 4 girls represented something new under the sun, something that could either elevate our species to unprecedented heights or destroy us completely. I pray that wherever they went, whatever they became, they remembered the love and kindness they received in our small community." The Underground Railroad station at Meridian Crossing continued operating until the end of the Civil War, but it was never the same after the Quadruplets' departure. Without their ability to detect infiltrators and betrayers, the operation became increasingly dangerous, and several conductors were captured or killed. The church itself was eventually abandoned in 1882, and the building slowly fell into decay. But the story of the Quadruplets didn't end with their disappearance. Over the following decades, reports began surfacing from across the United States of unusual children with extraordinary perceptive abilities. A boy in Michigan who could predict storms days before they occurred. Twin girls in Oregon who could locate missing people with impossible accuracy. A child in Louisiana who could tell when someone was lying just by looking at them. Most of these reports were dismissed as folklore or exaggeration, but a pattern emerged for those who knew what to look for. The children were always born during times of great violence or social upheaval. Their mothers had often been exposed to industrial chemicals or toxic substances during pregnancy, and the children themselves displayed the same electromagnetic sensitivity that Dr. Foster had documented in the Meridian Crossing quadruplets. Modern genetic research has confirmed what Dr. Foster suspected in 1857. Extreme environmental stress combined with exposure to certain toxic substances can trigger rapid genetic mutations that are passed on to subsequent generations. The quadruplets represented one of the first documented cases of stress-induced human evolution, a phenomenon that scientists now recognize as more common than previously believed. Recent studies have identified at least 63 documented cases of individuals with enhanced electromagnetic sensitivity born between 1840 and 1900, primarily in regions affected by industrial pollution or military conflict. While most of these individuals lived quiet lives and never developed their abilities to the extent demonstrated by the Meridian Crossing quadruplets, their genetic legacy has continued to spread through the American population. Dr. Lisa Warren, a neurologist at Harvard Medical School who has spent 15 years studying electromagnetic sensitivity in humans, believes that the descendants of these early cases may represent as much as 0.2% of the current American population. We're looking at the emergence of a human variant that possesses sensory capabilities our species has never had before, she explained in a 2021 interview. These people aren't telepaths or psychics. They're humans with enhanced neuronal sensitivity that allows them to detect electromagnetic patterns generated by other human brains. The implications for law enforcement, national security, and human society are profound. If Dr. Warren is correct, there may be thousands of Americans who possess some degree of ability to detect deception, sense hidden emotions, or locate missing persons. Most may not even be aware of their abilities, dismissing their accurate intuitions as lucky guesses or coincidence. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this research, and if the Meridian Crossing quadruplets were correct in their prediction that their abilities would strengthen with each generation, what might their descendants be capable of today? The answer to that question may be closer than anyone realizes. In 2005, during the renovation of an old church in southeastern Pennsylvania, construction workers discovered a hidden room containing documents that had been carefully preserved for over a century. Among these papers was a letter dated 1925, written in 4 different handwritings but signed with a single name. The Daughters of Meridian Crossing. The letter, addressed to future generations who will understand, contained detailed genealogical records showing the descendants of the 4 girls who had vanished in 1857. According to these records, the quadruplets had indeed survived their disappearance, lived long lives, and bore numerous children who inherited their enhanced abilities. More remarkable still, the letter contained precise predictions about future events that have since come to pass, the exact dates of both world wars, the location where the atomic bomb would be tested, the year of the first moon landing, and dozens of other historical events that wouldn't occur for decades after the letter was written. The letter concluded with a message that both comforts and unnerves those who have studied it. We are still here. We are still watching. We have grown in number and in ability with each passing generation, just as we promised we would. The time is coming when humanity will need the gifts we carry, and when that time arrives, we will.
Until then, we remain hidden, learning, growing, and preparing for the day when the world will finally be ready to accept what we represent, the next step in human evolution. This mystery from the Holloway Archives shows us that the boundaries of human perception may be far more flexible than we ever imagined, and that extraordinary circumstances can sometimes produce extraordinary people. What do you think of this account? Do you believe that human evolution could take such dramatic leaps under extreme conditions? Have you ever experienced moments of intuition so accurate they seemed impossible? Leave your thoughts in the comments below about the quadruplets and whether you think their descendants might still be among us today. If you enjoyed this investigation and want more mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about human capabilities, subscribe to the Holloway Archives, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves stories that blur the line between science and the impossible. See you in the next archive, where we'll explore another dark secret hidden in America's past.